Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the Hey, we're coming in with another excellent podcast. We certainly appreciate you as an audience tuning in, and we appreciate you guys being with here, especially those of you who listen to all the way at the end. I should put like a little special prize at the end for people, but guess what? The longer the conversations go, the better they get towards the end, so be sure to listen all the way. Be sure to refer the show to your friends, neighbors, relatives, friends, dogs, cats, get everybody in the action. Go to Google Play, go to iTunes and subscribe there. You can also go to youtube.com/Chris Voss, hit that bell notification button, and guess what? There's a new Siberian puppy videos waiting for you, and they are so cute. They will burn. It will hurt you, but you'll love it in the end, or something like that. Sounds like my first marriage. I don't know what that's about, but also there's reviews and all that sort of good stuff and all the podcasts as well. So go to YouTube and subscribe. Your life will be much happier for it, or you'll hate me. Either way, it sounds like my first marriage. We have a wonderful guest. I don't know why that keeps coming up. Esther Weinberg. And Esther Weinberg is the founder of MindLight Group. She and her team help mid to large media companies, their employees, and specifically their executive leadership teams to find and mentor dignity, leadership, and personal power in the workplace. Esther is a powerhouse game changer who has successfully transformed organizations, executive leaders, and teams for over 20 years. Esther creates breakthrough strategies for such companies as Netflix, Disney, Turner, DreamWorks Animation, Warner Brothers, and Sony. And Esther has held executive positions at Disney and Fox. We'll hold that against her. I'm just kidding. Disney company. It's a wonderful company. I don't know why that jab's in there. They do nice things. Okay. Welcome to the show, Esther.
It's great to be here, Chris. Thanks so much for having me.
Disney pretty much owns everything at this point, don't they? I mean, it seems like
or they're looking to acquire almost everything. So you're very close. You're very close here.
Hang on, I got a call from what Mickey Mouse? The Chris Voss Show? Not for sale. But can I date your? Never mind.
Seems like marriage keeps coming up, Chris. I think it's a theme.
I'm kind of at the end of my day and end of my. I've been going through this sleep thing where I've been getting a lot of sleep, so I'm just grabbing every low-hanging fruit easy joke that I can at this point. So forgive me if I'm just beating premises to death that are easy to go. So Esther, welcome to the show. My God, it's wonderful to have you.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I love your podcast. I've been listening to it incessantly, and I've really thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay. At least you have one subscriber. What can I tell you?
Okay. You're the only one. Then right. The rest of them. Okay. My mom doesn't even listen to the show, and God knows I wouldn't want her to for all the swear words. But so let's talk about you, Esther, and MindLight Group. Sounds like you do some pretty interesting things, and this concept of dignity in the workplace, which I don't hear a lot of people talk about.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. You probably a lot of people, when they think about dignity now, they're thinking about it for, sexual harassment with Me Too movement. And so there's a lot more of that conversation happening now. What I'm talking about when we define dignity is how do we create trust, respect, and safety at work? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you and I were talking about before the show started. I was saying, we spend more time at work than any place else. And a depressing statistic, not to bring up depressing stats, but there's an organization called Gallup. Their State of the World Workplace report from 2017 said that just 15%, 15% of employees are engaged in their jobs, and 85% are functioning below their potential. I mean, isn't that crazy? I think it's nuts.
That sounds like what I do every day or what I don't do every day.
Right. So, I mean, when you talk about dignity, we're talking about how do you really, at the level that you can really make an impact, because you could be sitting and listening to what you and I are talking about, and you're like, well, that sounds nice, Esther, but, how do I make a difference? I'm like a coordinator, and I don't have much power. But I think that it's really, if you think about it, how do you treat people where they have trust, respect, and safety? It's the cornerstone to creating that kind of environment. And when it's emphasized in the workplace, from the most senior level executives to the frontline employees, it bridges the line that transforms an organization, both personal and professional lives too, not just their work lives.
Hmm. Well, certainly, an aspect of dignity in the workplace and being able to feel like they're self-fulfilled, that they're respected. What are some other aspects of dignity that are beneficial in the workplace?
Well, think of it this way. Maybe it's easier to say what it's not sometimes than what it is. Think of it this way. It's like you and I were talking about before, like, okay, I don't agree with someone, so I ignore them. I know it sounds very mature. And then I encourage people to do the same, but it happens a lot. Or you don't feel valued because your ideas aren't heard or seen. Or you don't debate with someone because you think they're argumentative, so you're not even going to bother. Or it's easier to take credit for an idea simply because the person reports to you who created those ideas. You feel like you can own it. Mm-hmm. So just imagine if people came to work and they said, hey, you know what? I have at least 5 great ideas that if I could share it with someone would really make all the difference in the world. And so they actually went to their boss and had the freedom to know that A, I could share it. B, there's no guarantee that they'd be implemented, but at least they'd be given a fighting chance. And C, my direct boss is interested in what I have to say and is also actively interested in growing me. Wouldn't that be a novel concept? And so what can we do together in order to change the playing field? That's really what dignity looks like in real time.
And one aspect that a lot of entrepreneurs, this is really important for entrepreneurs, people that want to build a business, whether it's a small one or a large one or a large company like Disney, is an environment. What sort of environment or culture you're building inside of your corporation? And I believe when you start your first business, you really need to start asking yourself that thing, or at least when you start hiring employees, what sort of culture do you want to have in your business? To me, whenever we started our companies, that was an important aspect. From the very start, I wanted to lay a foundation of trying to have a learning organization. One of the rules we always had in our business was the only stupid question is the unasked question.
Yes.
So if you I went through this experience recently with someone in a sort of business sort of relationship where I brought up some kind of leading ideas and questions, and the person dismissed me as being ignorant and stupid when I was using exploratory, like, what about this, or what about that? And then it became a very tisk, you don't know sort of conversation. I'm like, just because I ask questions or put up ideas doesn't mean I'm stupid and ignorant. You've really jumped a chasm there. And I think that happens a lot in business. Like I said, we used to have in our office, the only dumb question is the unasked question, because usually that would be the one that would the employee who never asked the question, like, should I do this or shouldn't I do this, would end up costing me 10 grand. Because they'd foul something up and go, well, I didn't know. I thought about asking, but I was afraid to ask. And you're just like, wow, okay, your little fear just cost me 10 grand. And I realized that having an environment where people wouldn't feel like they were negated, or that they were treated like they were stupid because they would ask questions, or because a lot of times, the other thing is we try to foment a lot of a learning organization to have people bring forth ideas. And like you say, people need to have a secure, safe place to bring up ideas without being treated like they're stupid, or having a better understanding of the workplace, et cetera, et cetera. And dignity, I think, ties into a part of that sort of thing you want to have in your business as a good environment.
Well, Chris, in the example that you brought up when you were saying something and the person kind of dismissed you, was it the kind of conversation where you were just having free-flowing ideas, or it was like, hey, let me just share something with you? What was the context of it?
The context of it was we were engaged in a project, and we're trying to figure out how to resolve the project. And the person, they just kind of had a one rail system as to how to do stuff. And we were going along with that, and it was fine. And then I said, what if we tried this? And then it became the tisk that you got.
Right.
And it's like, no, I haven't diverted this in this direction. I just said, what if some of these other areas? And that's the reason I've been an entrepreneur and I think outside the box and I've been an innovator, is because I go, why are we doing it this way? Maybe there's a better way. And sometimes, sometimes I'll say, this idea sounds a little crazy, but what do you think about this? And then sometimes either myself or whoever I'm marrying an idea to will go, okay, here's why that might work, here's why that won't work. And I'm like, okay. And I learned a long time ago, I had a CEO teach me that I worked for them. They sent me out to work a project, and I was like, this project is stupid. And they're like, well, we want you to go do it, Chris, and try and make this project work. So I went and tried to make the project work. I came back. It was a fail. It was destined to fail the way it was built. But the CEO said to me, they go, okay, we just wanted to make sure that was still failing. And I was like, what do you mean?
That's interesting.
You tried this once before, and then you sent me on a suicide mission? And they're like, yeah, we just wanted to see if either you can make it work or if the concept of it is broken.
Yeah.
And the concept's still broken, it still doesn't work. But we know you did your best job, and it was still a suicide mission. But what we do know now is that it still does not work. Nothing has changed and stuff. And what that taught me was that, trying and everything else, but having a dignity of environment where people can bring up ideas. I've had some of my best ideas from employees who've gone, Chris, it's not really my business to say so, and don't cut my head off, but what if we tried it this way? And you're like, holy crap, that's the thing we've been looking for. That's the holy grail. That's, and they had it. And so having an office place of dignity, and a lot of people don't do that.
You're right.
CEOs.
It's an interesting thing, Chris, what you're saying, because what I think gets missed sometimes is what happens is that it's how you invite the ideas and contributions, and then how do you deal with it when you get it, I think is what you're describing. So number one is that it's incumbent upon the person presenting the ideas to make sure that the person that they want to hear it is in a space where they can. Because have you ever had a bad day, or you're tired, like you were talking about before, and someone comes to you and you're just like, okay. It's not that you don't respect them. It's not that you don't want to hear it, but you're just either tired, or you just had another fire drill come up 5 minutes before, and you just can't hear it. So sometimes it's incumbent upon the person presenting the ideas, because remember, when we're talking about dignity, there's two things that's really important. Everybody plays a role. I can't guarantee that you're going to treat me with dignity, but what I can do is guarantee that I will do it to you. So in that case, if I'm coming to you, it'd be great. Like, hey, Chris, I've been thinking about this project that we've been working on, and I've had a few ideas germinate. Would you be open to us having a conversation about it now, or should I schedule some other time? Because this way you get to say it's the invitation that gets missed. And then what happens, as oftentimes happens with feedback, is that it's not really invited, it's just given. And then sometimes it might work because, Chris, like yourself, you're open, and sometimes that may work, and sometimes it might implode. So you have both people. So there's the incumbent responsibility on both people, the person that's giving the ideas to make sure the person who's hearing it can be in a space to hear it. And then the other person who's the listener has to make sure that they can say, hey, you know what? Actually, I'm really exhausted, never a lot of sleep, or whatever the issue might be. And you know what? But your idea is really important to me, and what you have to say. So let's set up some time tomorrow. We'll go through it for about 10, 15 minutes. I'll hear what you got, and then let's see where it goes from there. That's creating this kind of what I call dignity zone, which means you can share what you have freely, and you're in a space where you can be treated with respect. And the same thing for me, because I'm inviting that respect too.
Yeah, and having respect amongst employees, having them feel fulfilled, having them feel like they can contribute, makes for a deeper depth of a job. They're just not showing up, phoning it in, and watching cat videos during the workday.
That's right.
It's amazing to me how many bosses miss the principle that listening is important. Because they take this thing, we're the boss. Recently in one of the communities I'm in, I've been hearing the echoings and the admins is like, well, this is our thing and this is the way we do it. And I'm like, I think you're missing that this is a community and this is really all of our thing. And you're just kind of there to make sure some of the rules are followed and do a little babysitting, but this isn't your thing. It's our thing. Because we are the community. I suppose it's the same in leadership position where people go like, this is our thing. You know, and listening, I think is a loss factor. We're so focused nowadays on this hyper thing where we're looking at our phones and we have so many different distractions, of course, and listening to each other is probably definitely a lost sort of art.
Well, I'll tell you, it's a funny thing that we're talking about this because I was having a conversation with a client of mine yesterday, and we were talking about someone that works for her, and she and according to my client, who's a boss, she thought that her direct report showed some bad judgment. So she's going to sit down and have a conversation with her about some decisions she's made recently. And I said to her, one of the first things as we were talking about, I said, what are you curious about? And she's like, what do you mean, what am I curious about? I said, okay, well, she made some decisions you think are poor. So how are you going to approach the conversation? And she said, well, I'm just going to find out how it happened or why it happened. I said, okay. And we talked about it some more. And what she realized was that if she went in that way, A, it may sound very accusatory. B, is that she'll never get the map in front of her of how the person actually came to the decision. And what's missing when we talk about, and when I talk about what's missing, I'm not talking about what's wrong or broken. I'm saying if it was in the equation, it can make all the difference. So if she approached it and said, you know, I'm really curious how she even got to making this decision. What informed her steps that she said, hey, this is the best decision to make for my brand, for the way I represent my team and my department, and the way I want to represent the company. You know, all three of those layers. So her opportunity, meaning, you know, my client, as the boss, I put that in air quotes, well, she is the boss, is to be curious and to ask the right questions, because you're right, listening can be a lost art. I also think that one thing we have to continue to foster is how we be innately curious inside of companies. And how do we be curious? Salespeople have this right because they're selling something. So lots of times when I'm doing work with salespeople, doing training and development programs with salespeople, they have it down because they innately need to do this because they're in a sales conversation. You know this is an entrepreneur, Chris. but typically people themselves, they don't, you know, because you're stressed, you're under a deadline, you know, you're moving from thing to thing so quickly. And you're right, technology does suck up a lot of our energy. Yeah. But we don't stop to pause, say, hey, you know, what am I curious about? What questions do I need to ask in order to really get the roadmap of how the person thought that they came to the conclusion they did? Because if you just tell and sell people what to do or how to do it differently, what you're doing is you're not developing people. You're just creating a robot that you want to mimic you. And then when you're not around, they're going to continue doing whatever bad behavior that you were reprimanding them in the first place. Instead, if you really saw how they were thinking in the roadmap, then you could go, oh, that's where they went awry. They thought that this was actually okay to do, you know, whatever that it might be. And so I think that one thing is we talk sometimes about listening, but really think if we could develop the curiosity and how do we ask questions that really get to the heart of what's going on, not in a place of judgment or blame, but really get to be diagnostic about something, then we can really make a huge difference.
Yeah. And so how do you lay down a foundation of having an organization that has dignity established, and then of course, I don't know, teaches it, manages it? Is it an HR thing, or how do you go about implementing this?
I think it's a great point, because a lot of times when you talk about things like this, people say exactly what you said. Does it go to HR? And I would really say that, of course, HR is in charge of people. You know, that's just what they do. They're human resources, okay? But I would say that this is a concept that has to be, if you're in a hierarchical organization, it has to start from the top. If you're in a flatter organization, like, you know, something like Tesla's doing recently, it still has to come from people that are more of the decision makers. Because first of all, you have to know that it starts with you. You can't force executives and leaders around you to create this culture of dignity, but you can start by bringing it into your own life, your own relationships, your own work. But if I'm an executive, what executives tend to forget, I mean, not to sound all paranoid, but people are watching them. So if you decide that you're going to treat people or foster a way to encourage and develop people as a way of being, I think that Salesforce, it was interesting. I saw a report about Salesforce a few weeks ago that they were they decided one day that they were going to investigate, are they actually having pay equity with men and women? And that what they discovered was actually pay equity and pay parity did not exist when they were talking about the fact that it does exist at Salesforce. And so really the hats off to Mark Benioff, the CEO of Salesforce. He came and said, we're going to change that. We're going to look at all the salaries and we're going to make it equitable. And then we're going to do this review again. And a few years later, he came back and realized they still don't have pay equity. What he realized was that they weren't, because they acquired new companies, they had never mandated that throughout the whole organization. So it had to come from him to say, and the head of HR was part of it too, to say, we want pay equity everywhere throughout the organization. So we're going to do this review now rigorously. I think it was every year or 6 months, they're going to do this exhaustive review. And if it costs us money, I think it costs them $6 million per time. They did it twice already, per time that they did the review. So it has to come from a place of authority, because if it comes from HR, unfortunately, HR has a bad rap. So it depends on the organization you're in. They're like, HR is just the people that fire people, or HR just makes us do things, or HR makes us write things. I mean, I can't even tell you sometimes the things that people say about HR people. And I think they get a really bad rap, because lots of the HR people I deal with are some of the most strategic, visionary business leaders I've ever met. So it has to come from someone like a CEO or someone higher up to say, we're actually mandating it, and this is what it looks like. And how do we measure it? Because data is so crucial today. So what are the things we want to measure? So for example, let's say you have a company that's not developing people. They're not creating, people don't have any career roadmaps. People don't have any roadmaps of how they're actually being developed on an ongoing basis. Well, maybe that's the first thing that you need to do in order for people to feel like you're invested in them, like you're growing them, that you're building them. And so as I can't do that for myself. I mean, I can go to my boss and say, hey, can we talk about me? But lots of people hate that conversation, especially if you're not at a senior level. But if you're at a senior level, you can mandate it and say, no, we're going to have these conversations. These conversations are really important. And so that makes the difference. So there's lots of different ways, but I think it does have to come from, it has to start with power. I'm sorry. This is a power conversation. It does have to start with, it starts two ways. I call it like the sandwich effect. In your middle management, you're like the bologna in the middle. I would say that it has to come from senior management, because they're the ones that have to say, this is really important. Here's how we're going to execute it. Then you, no matter what level you're at in the company, you have to say, okay, here's what this means to me to create a dignity zone and have dignity and trust, respect, and safety. Here's how I'm going to choose to behave, and here's how I'm going to lead and manage other people. Only then, by doing both together, sandwiching it together, will it really inculcate itself in the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely hard in getting people to get over the norms, getting people to deal with how they handle being a manager, how to be a boss. In the past, I always have been the greatest boss in the world, although I thought I was trying to. Certainly could have used some more training. They certainly never give enough training in life. That's one thing definitely is there. But yeah, I mean, I like, there's the old concept that I always had in my brain. And I think old Nightingale used to talk about this, the man on the white horse. And you can substitute nowadays for whomever on the white horse. But the leader, the CEO, really has to set down these paradigms ahead of time and control the environment, or try and influence the environment of the stuff. We've seen the different environments that can be created by CEOs, and sometimes they can be very destructive. Travis, I forget his last name, the CEO of Uber, are a very destructive, sort of caustic environment. And I've seen different CEOs who operate in in a world where they're incredibly creative and they're very successful, and they're great at developing new things and just becoming this steamrolling device. But the problem is they end up destroying so much stuff around them as they're doing this creation that the destruction almost overcomes them and wipes out what they created. Certainly, Travis, ended up losing his job over the destructive forces that came from his inertia of creating that company. And so, a CEO or a leader really has to set this down. I mean, I suppose people within an organization could try and set their own standards, try and deal with each other with dignity. But the hardest part is to get that other person, that other party to reciprocate.
Well, it's a few things. I'm glad you're bringing this up, because you have to remember that it's like what Ram Charan wrote in his book Execution, is that you can have strategy, but you can have the people. You can have the greatest strategy in the world, and you can have the greatest people in the world. But unless you have a real execution strategy for how it's going to get implemented, and you're monitoring it, then that's where it falls off. Mm. So as the head of the, I think we're talking about responsibilities in two ways. One is at the head of the organization, you can sit on high and say, this is how I want to create a dignity zone in my environment. That's okay. Okay, now how are we going to do it? And what gets lost is in the how. So, and also what I find, like when I do training and development programs, oftentimes leaders will put in junior people. And then I'll have people say to me, I got to tell you, I wish my boss was in this conversation. So you're not inculcating what you're trying to really, the theory, into something very practical and measurable that everybody does. It's like I say to people, before you're going to have any kind of conversation with someone, if you're having a tough conversation, this is a simple thing. I call it the 5 A's. It's a very simple thing to actually do. Number one, just sit down. You can do it in your phone. You can do it on a napkin. Is to just say, okay, what am I aware of? What am I feeling? Just literally jot it down. Second thing is, what am I aware of? What's the truth here? What is really, because people make up dramas. They never make up comedies. Everything's very dramatic. Then the third thing is, what am I meant to learn here? What am I meant to acquire? What knowledge am I meant to acquire from this situation? And then fourth is, what am I accountable for? What's my part in the situation? And then the fifth step is action. What action can I take? So if people just, no matter what line you're in of the business, if you just did those 5 A's, that in itself would start creating a measure of dignity inside of an organization. It's really, what we're talking about is you can get very trapped in the lofty concept of what dignity is, but we also have to make it extremely practical. So when people listening to this podcast, they leave here and they're like, what the heck can I do? It's very simple things that you can do that can make a tremendous difference.
Yeah, I love the 5 A's. Those are brilliant. Mm-hmm. In fact, you can use those in personal life.
You sure can.
We used the podcast earlier today, and I was talking about something similar in searching for a concept of what you've just outlined, where, trying to, the conversation we were having prior was, people trying to find themselves in life and discovering that they'd done everything they were supposed to and been unhappy, and then how to fulfill themselves. And we were talking about the concept of, is it me internally, or is it externally, or is it both, and how do we deal with those? And I like the 5 A's because that really comes up with a way to address it and analyze it, and be able to master it in getting something done with it.
Yeah, because I think what we often, what you're dealing with inside of companies is you're dealing with a bunch of people running around trying to do good work. And then you're also dealing with human behavior. And I'm sorry, but human behavior gets really wonky. And when we go to try to give people feedback, we have to remember that people get triggered by certain things. Neuroscience has proven it too. And so how do we actually take responsibility for our part in the conversation, how we're interacting with people? That's what the 5 A's are really all about.
Yeah, and taking responsibility is so important. So many times in communication with other people, they don't take responsibility for their stuff. I mean, there's like my recent thing that I was mentioning, where I had a conversation with something where they started berating me about how I didn't, know what I was doing, wasn't paying attention, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, no, I'm just asking questions as to either learn more or maybe discover some alternative ways that we can do this or contribute to it. Just because I'm asking questions doesn't mean I'm stupid or I don't understand what the core problem is. I'm just offering up additional ideas. And I don't really need to be steamrolled, and trying to get that other person to self-analyze and do that can be a challenge as well. I mean, that's the biggest thing we have, I think, sometimes in working with these companies or personal relationships, is making sure that the other person understands who we are and what we're trying to accomplish or what we're communicating, I guess.
Well, also, I think what we don't take into account, and a book by Sheila Heen and Douglas Stone called Thanks for the Feedback, I think, talked about it brilliantly, which is when we give, which I think may have happened with you, unfortunately, Chris, is when we give people feedback, what happens is that it does trigger them. And so it can trigger them by their identity. So meaning that that's not who I perceive myself to be. They can be triggered by the truth. Like, hey, that doesn't ring true to me. That's not how I define this. And it can also ring true about, you can be triggered by your relationship, meaning that, hey, you and I don't have the relationship enough that if you're going to tell me this, that it's really going to have resonance. And so sometimes we may need, as the speaker, may need to take a step back and go, wait a minute, I think I just triggered this person. And which area did I trigger them? And you could even pause the conversation. Sometimes I use the word pause because it actually is, I know it's odd because you're thinking pause, like, stop. And sometimes I'll say, can we pause here for a second? Let's take a step back. I think you're triggered by something, you're really offended by something. Remember a few weeks ago, I was talking to a client of mine, we were talking about the fact that he was having communication issues with his staff, and one person was leaving as a result of it. And I asked him, this sounds really familiar. It sounds like, because about 6 months ago, we had this conversation about other different people that worked at your company, and they were having some discord, and he got really upset. And I remember I stopped and I said, I think I just want to pause here for a second because I think you seem to be triggered. And I'm not sure what I said that set you off. And he goes, I am triggered. I'm really triggered by what I just said. Because he said to me, I see this as a personal attack on my leadership. And when you said that sounds familiar, that these issues were here 6 months ago, I took that to mean that I haven't done anything and I haven't addressed it. And I've just let all these communications issues fester. And now as a result, people are leaving. Wow. So and then he's, really hats off to him. He paused himself and he said, you know what? I realize that that's not the case. I've done some things, but I think what I really need to do is figure out what's getting to the root of the problem, because I'm not getting to the root of the problem.
I really like your pause thing. I need to write that down and put that in my notes to take and do with people, because I have things with interactions or communications with people where they tip me off by what they're communicating, that they're either assuming that I don't know something. They're assuming something that isn't correct or isn't factual. Sometimes it's in a personal relationship. Sometimes it's not. I joke a lot. Sometimes I'll have some people will take some of the joking as being for real.
I see.
Let's use an example. This wasn't something that bothered me, by the way, but we use this example because it's really easy. I think when we were talking pre-show, you're like, well, your puppy's peeing on the floor a lot. And I'm like, well, it's not really peeing on the floor a lot. And that wasn't really something you were trying to push on me, but it was a managing of perception and stuff. And that would be a great case where I think I did say at the time, well, I'm kind of embellishing that a little bit for the comedic kind of it. But I do have situations, and I've been in not only relationships where I've had someone in a relationship say to me something, and I've sat there afterwards mulling it over going, are they stuck on a paradigm that isn't correct about me? And this is, who knows where this wormhole is going. The same thing with people I work, like the example we gave earlier, where someone is assuming that just because I'm asking questions that I'm stupid, I don't know what I'm talking about, or I'm not following along, or maybe I'm not listening to them, or whatever it is. And that's not really the case. I'm just trying to add more value to what we're doing. Yeah, I like the pause thing because it I guess it gets really people to reset, really think through each of their positions, I guess, when you do the pause.
Yeah, and also it's interesting what you're saying too, because sometimes what happens is a couple of things. One is that perception rules. It just does. If someone perceives you to be a certain way, unfortunately, that is the truth. It just is. Now, what happens is that oftentimes, especially at work, we walk around and we don't know what the perception is. And so we get caught in this weird paradigm where you can say to someone, well, they seem to think that I don't know what I'm talking about, or they seem to think I'm sarcastic, or they seem to think that I'm constantly the jokester, or something like that, to go for your saying. But that's not who I am. I've got a lot to contribute. I have great ideas. I just happen to like to joke around. So sometimes it's really important for us to realize and to even examine what is the perception of us in the marketplace. When I'm talking about the marketplace, I'm talking about at work. Because then what happens is that becomes the lens to which people see you through, whether you like it or not. It's just the truth. Yep. And so sometimes what I invite people to do is to ask, sometimes to get a cohort of a few people together you really trust, and send out an email and say, what adjectives would you, I'm trying to get some intel on how I'm perceived by others. And I'd love for you to share with me, what's 5 adjectives you use to describe me? And if people are really honest, you enlist honest feedback, it's really interesting what you get back. And then you get to go, that's spot on. That's what I want to magnify. Or you know what, that's not how I want to be perceived. And now let me be in an active role of shifting the perception. But unless you know, you can't really work with it.
I did that once, asked for feedback, and all I did was get a lot of 4-letter expletives back.
Yeah, sometimes you have to do it. You have to just have someone do it for you. So it depends. And also at companies now, this is fairly standard, is that you can do certain assessments that will give you that kind of feedback. The thing, though, is feedback is, okay, the data is wonderful, but then what do you do about it? Because the thing is that what I find people come to me a lot that they want to learn how to do now is how do they really influence and how they build their visibility. One of the core things you have to know even before you build your visibility and you build your influence is you have to know how you're perceived, because if you're already off, it's going to be difficult to be able to influence people inside your company if you're not perceived in the way that you want to be perceived. Yeah.
Have you ever read Glassdoor, the Glassdoor website?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
So when you read some of those comments, you see that a lot of the different issues that people are having there are clearly, if they're bad reviews, they're issues where the employee didn't feel dignified or didn't have a dignity environment that they were working with.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember once, this was probably about a year ago, I had a client, a company come to me and they said, we're really trying to re-examine one of the divisions of our company, and we think we should just, it hasn't been working. We think we should just cut it. And I was like, okay, wait a minute. Well, it's just not systematic. They're like, it's not making money. We should just cut it. And I said, oh, well, maybe we should take a step back before you cut it. And I went online to look at the Glassdoor reviews, and it was scandalous.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of the Glassdoor reviews were about people feel marginalized, they don't feel heard, their ideas aren't valued, they're not respected. People try to bring up ideas that are very modern, they're not even thought about. People are demeaned. People are, let's just shut up and do your work. It's they're being grinded and working hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. And so if you look at this, you go, okay, wait a second. So you're telling me you want to cut the division because it's not making money. Totally get it. We're not a non-for-profit. We're a for-profit company. But you have to remember that dealing with people leads to profitability. Okay, so let's take a look at how we're treating people. And if we change that, would that change the bottom line? How could that change the bottom line? And so there began the conversation. But yeah, Glassdoor reviews can really tell you what's happening inside of a company, and you can directly correlate it oftentimes to profit.
Wow.
100%.
Wow. and whether or not there's dignity in the workplace environment. You know, you know, I never wanted employees that would just show up for work, phone it in. Some of my best, greatest, and most respected employees were the employees who'd work after hours, who would, you know, never tell me, hey, I got to go home. Certainly I was, you know, I didn't expect them to stay late, but some of my best employees, you could always just tell they always gave 110%. And I always wanted people to feel that way, but, you know, there's some employees that do phone it in. But, you know, I think years ago, there was a book called The Learning Organization, The Fifth Dimension, The Fifth Discipline, the Learning Organization. I forget who wrote it. And so I wanted, when I read that book, I said, when I create my first companies, I want them to be learning organizations. I want them to be openness. I want people to be asked questions. I'm not sure I always had an environment, in looking back as a boss, of total dignity. I was a real asshole sometimes, but what can you say? But usually when I was an incredible asshole, employees would push me to an employee to push me to the point of breaking. But you know, I don't know, maybe there was some, I should have listened to it better or something. I don't know. I usually have great employees and very few bad employees, but I always look back and think, you know, I really should have been a better boss. But definitely establishing environment in your business makes all the difference in the world, in what the tone is setting. And it does come from the top down. I've seen organizations where they're run like a high school. It's like a whole popularity campaign where the CEO sits atop this pile of lemmings that are constantly clawing them and giving them fawning and attention. Am I describing the president? And they create this sort of soap opera high school sort of atmosphere where very little work is being done of quality. And people are just more concerned about, you know, trying to, you know, rub the boss the right way and maybe get a promotion. And it's who can kiss ass the most. And the person's parading around like Kim Jong-il going on. And, you know, I've seen different soap opera drama offices that have been run where, and it always comes down to the leader, the tones they set, the way they operate. Yeah.
You know, it's a funny thing to hear you talk about, you know, you're reflecting on your own leadership, because you have to remember something. We're always playing the best game that we know how to play. If we knew how to play it any different, we would play it very different. And so if you have openness and willingness to learn, which is what you're talking about, then of course your leadership is going to change. Also remember, people do not leave a company, they leave a boss. And so how you develop people, how you grow them, how you mind that on a consistent basis will determine how people, and the stickiness of people. Now I want to be clear, it doesn't mean that people are not going to leave. You have to remember your job is to grow people. When you're a leader, what people often forget is that the more you grow in an organization, you're not getting paid for your work. You're getting paid for how you grow other people, and you're getting paid for your ideas. And I think that people oftentimes forget. I said this to somebody the other day. I said, you have to remember what you're being paid for. You're being paid not necessarily for you doing great work, because of course you're doing great work. At the level you're at, you should be doing great work, for goodness sakes. But you're being paid for your ideas, and you're being paid for growing people. If you have zero interest in growing people, then we have to actually have that conversation, because you need a different job. But when you get to a certain level, your job is to groom and grow others. And I'll tell you something, no one's got it down 100%. You know, this is the kind of thing that, you know, I'm working with a company now that feedback is really important. They're very open, they're very transparent, but they're not really all the way open and transparent with each other. And they work people like a dog, and they burn them out. You know, they give them food and they give them playtime and stuff them full of stuff, and that's great, and give them all these perks, but they burn them like a sieve. So, you know, there's ways in which to augment all of it. There's not a one size fits all here. But if you remember that people leave a boss, not a company, and you have that on your mind every day, that will change the way that you do your work. At least you hope it does.
That's a great concept. I wrote that down. People don't leave a company, they leave a boss. And probably largely they don't feel respected. They don't feel like they contribute.
That's right.
Ideas. They don't feel fulfilled. Wondering how many people left me over the years.
Remember, you were playing the best game you know how to play. Okay.
That's on my tombstone for life. He played the best game he knew how to play. That's true. He was the great American hero. He didn't come with the manual, so he just winged it. Right. And I think sometimes we have to look at our parents the same way and realize or reconcile that they did the best they could with what they had at the time, and sometimes that's all you can ask of people. Sometimes is doing the best they could. Unless you're paying them, then you can slap the shit out of them.
Yes, of course. Look, I remember a year ago, I got a phone call from a company, and they called me and they said, "Hey, we want you to, train and develop this executive." And I said, "Okay, what's going on?" They said, "Well, he's had some issues with how he speaks to people." And I said, "What do you mean? Like his language? Like he's?" And they said, "Well, he's not exactly kind." I said, "Okay." I said, is it to everybody? Is it to a certain segment of people? And they said, "Well, he has some issues with women." I said, "Okay." I said, "Well, what about?" And they said, "Wait a minute. Actually, no, he has it with men too." I said, "Okay." And they said, "So we really would love for you to, you come in and do some one-on-one work with him." And I said, "Are you talking to me because you're being sued?" And they said, No, we're not being sued." I said, "So in other words, are you talking to me because if someone is going to sue you, you want to say, we engaged this woman and a company and they came in and did their due diligence?" She said, "Well, I think it is a little bit of that." I said, "So here's what I'm going to tell you. I won't work with the guy, but I'll work with his boss." So because how long has this been going on? And she said, "Well, it's been going on for about a year or more." I said, "And has his boss been there a year or more?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "I'd be thrilled to work with his boss, but I'm not going to work with this guy." And then she said, "Well, that's a great point." And then I never heard back from them. So,
it's interesting. It's interesting how people do things, especially in today's world. But yeah, I mean, getting people to be introspective about what they're doing, get them to listen to each other. I think if I ever get in a relationship again, I will probably immediately start going to couples therapy just so I can get the foundation right and get the assumptions. One thing, and I'm using this as a personal thing because I've always been in business for myself. I've never worked for people most of my life. And so I don't have a lot of stuff to do. So I'm going to pull from personal relationships. Absolutely. But one thing I've always found in my personal relationships and some of my business partnerships is at the end, when it's over, you've called it, it's DOA, or well, that wouldn't be DOA, dead at the end. I'll slowly start finding out the misconceptions the other person had of me, the assumptions they made or misconceptions they made, and some of them are so glaringly outlandish. And obviously, somewhere we didn't communicate, or somewhere I didn't call it out and go, "Hold on, what is the assumption you have about me?" And so it's been kind of that way. I mean, maybe I suppose companies could look at their exit interviews and go, "Hey, what was the thing on this employee? Why did they leave? What was their issue?" Of course, maybe some people glorify them so they make sure and get their check.
Well, look, I'll tell you something. I mean, I worked with an organization, and there was a division of the company that was very ignored. They had wanted to have resources. They were being badmouthed by other parts of the company. The head of the division was really trying to make some significant changes. but the home office company wasn't really listening and wasn't really providing guidance and support. And then one day, all of a sudden, people started leaving. Shock, I'm sure. People started leaving. And then all of a sudden, people are like, wait a minute, who's leaving? Why are they leaving? What's going on? What happened? Whoa, what? And the head of the department was saying, I've been asking you guys from HR to my boss for resources, for tools, to come out to show people that someone's going to do what they can to make a difference, to listen to us, to make some significant changes here. I have been screaming, I have been calling, I've been doing whatever I can, and now people are leaving. And so then the person in HR said, well, I want to find out in the exit interview why people are really leaving. And I remember he said, the guy I was working with said, I would be shocked in the exit interview if she doesn't say, no one was listening. We were trying for months and for a year to straighten out our image, to work on developing our people, to growing them. No one was providing us with resources. The head of the department was, screaming as much as he could. And now we're losing people. So, I went out and I got another great job. So I'm making more money. I got a great title. I'm sorry, I'm out. Yeah. So I think that what happens is, unfortunately, sometimes, now look, in the organization I'm describing, if the exit interviews are a wake-up call, then whatever the organization had to go through, they had to go through in order for it to be a wake-up call and now start implementing in a different way. If the exit interviews just fall on deaf ears, then it's a total waste of time. Total waste of time.
Yeah, and great employees are hard to come by. They're hard to find. The 80-20 rule, I think, is indicative there, where 20% of your best employees are the ones who probably do 80% of your work. I know all my best employees were the best ones of my employees were the people who cared the much and gave the most. And certainly getting them and acquiring employees, keeping great employees is super important. And, people want to be fulfilled. I mean, most people do. Most people just don't want to do their job and phone it in. They want to feel like they're accomplishing something. It's just not about handing them a paycheck. I think some bosses, I used to have a boss years ago, and he was a good boss. But I remember one day he was bringing up a story and kind of mocking an employee, and I said, well, what happened? He said, well, the employee came in and was complaining to me about how we don't say thank you to the employees, and he said, well, look, we don't need to say thank you. Or thank you at the end of 2 weeks of your check. That's the thank you. And I was like, well, technically you're right on paper, logically, I guess technically the thank you, but obviously, in the cases of what you're talking about, the employee didn't feel like there was much dignity in the relationship he was having with the boss.
Well, they felt that there was dignity with their boss. They didn't feel like there was dignity inside the company. Mm-hmm. And so it was eroding them completely. Yeah. But it's a really interesting thing that you're saying, because it's easily fixable. Mm-hmm. When you talk about appreciation, and this is something I hear commonly, like, why do I have to say thank you because someone's doing their job? I had someone literally say that to me a few weeks ago. And I said, look, it comes down to this. People want to feel appreciated. It's not like every minute you go, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. But when someone does, it's what I say to people, you're teaching people where to aim the arrow. So I'll give you an example. Someone works on a project and they do a really great job. As someone who works with them, not even their boss, it would be great to say, hey, Chris, when you did X, Y, and Z, that really changed the course of how this project was going to go and made it so much more successful. So when I hear that, I go, oh, when I did this one thing, it made all the difference. I'm going to do more of it. Mm-hmm. So when you're in a position of power and authority, when you say that to someone, you specifically acknowledge a skill or an attribute or an action that they did, then what I do as the listener is that I want to do more of that. I want to do more of that because that's bringing me success and acknowledgement and praise and visibility. And so when you acknowledge someone, that's what you're doing. You're building more of someone's skills that they innately have, and you're training and developing them to do more of it. The other thing that I wanted to say that you're talking about is I think that what often gets maligned is that in companies, you've got A players, B players, C players, D players, F players. But what we do is we focus on the A players. Like, these are the superstars, they're fantastic. And we miss the B players. Those B players are the steady eddies. They help make the company run. You got to develop both. You need places where you're developing the great and you're developing the people that are keeping the ship going. Because if you don't have them, you don't have a company. Yeah. You need a mix of both. Not everyone's going to be a visionary and the next CEO. And so you have to have tactics and strategies, and employees have to feel that they're trusted and respected, even if they're at that B level, because they know their value to the company. They do. Yeah,
most definitely. Most definitely. So any other tips you can give us as we round out the hour?
So I would just say a few things, just to recap some things we talked about. Do your 5 A's. Remember, we talked about aware, accurate, acquire, accountability, action. Make sure that you're really doing your best to check yourself first. Mind your triggers. Know when you get triggered. Know when you're triggering other people. Make sure that you advocate for yourself of treating, other people with trust, respect, and safety. Advocate to create the organization like that as well, because that's what's going to really stick for the most part.
And I love your ideas. I'm going to go back and write down the 5 A's. And certainly with what, to extend this, I mean, what corporations are really dealing with now with the Me Too movement, a lot of these sort of issues, well, some of them could be resolved if they would have organizations with dignity, where people would look at each other with dignity as opposed to a sexual object or whatever in a workplace environment. I don't know if it would help monsters like Harvey Weinstein, who they're monsters. Yeah. But I think for the normal average person, maybe we just need more of that in the environments. I think we need more of that in the world, when you look at each other with dignity, listen to each other, maybe in our relationships and everything else. So the lessons certainly go from business to personal to being dignity and giving dignity and being dignifiable to each other in this world. So there's that.
Well, remember, it's very hard, Chris, to give what you don't have. So if you choose immediately that you say, hey, look, the only thing I can do today is be more mindful about how I treat others and how I execute my work, that in itself will be able to give back to the organization that you're in right away.
See, my problem is I think about how to execute others and be more. I get those two mixed up.
I think that's backwards.
I got a bunch of them in the background. Anyway. Thanks for coming on the show, Esther. We certainly appreciate you, and hopefully we've treated you with dignity. So
you certainly have, Chris.
Work at it some more and try and learn more from that. And I'm going to go back and listen to some of the points. I love some of the points you made. People don't leave a company, they leave a boss. And the 5 A's, I really like that, especially from an application of being in personal life as well as business. Anyway, thanks to my audience. So, Esther, give us your plugs one more time so we can check out your website.
Yeah, so if people want to reach me, they can go to MindLightGroup.com. Mind like your head, light like a light bulb, group like all of us. MindLightGroup.com. Check out our programs, contact me directly, and check out videos that we have and all resources on the site.
Sounds great. And everyone, be sure to refer the show. We certainly appreciate you guys listening. You guys are the most awesome audience ever. And be sure to watch for all the great guests we have on the show. Go to Google Play, iTunes, youtube.com/Chris Voss. Hit that bell notification button. And we certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks again, and we'll see you guys next time.